Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first edition of Too Brad for You in Conversation. Very excited about this, and our first guest is Mr. Jay Ingram, well known science broadcaster back home in Canada. He's been on the radio, the TV since about the 1980s. He's written many books, he does lots of live science communication events, plays in a band. He's a big part of the Beakerhead Science Festival. We got into that a little bit. I first met him at the Beakerhead Science Communication course. And I'm very thankful that he agreed to do this. He allowed me to come over to the house, set up, and we had a great chat. We talked about science communication, some of the current struggles in this pursuit. We talked about, of course, the Beakerhead Festival. We got into some Alzheimer's and aging topics, and we even touched on Bigfoot at the end. So, once again, thank you very much, Jay, for having me over. I really enjoyed it. I hope you too enjoy it. And as always, we have the Freak Motif playing us in. They have a new album called Hot Plate. It's available now. Check out all of their stuff at frkmtf.com. Many thanks to the Freaks. I'll let them take it away, and then it's on to my conversation with Mr. Jay Ingram. And so this is the first time I'm trying it. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
I have John Gilliard lined up next week to do one as well. You remember John, my PhD supervisor, parasitologist at UFC?
Yeah, I follow him on Twitter.
Yeah, he's pretty active
he,
too.
He usually, it seems to me, he retweets pictures of idyllic English landscapes.
Usually with a sheep or two involved. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, it's a signature kind of tweet. I love those. You practically know, you see the image and you know it's him before you've even read his name.
Yeah.
Say, oh, that Dorset sheep or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
Beautiful. What could be better? You know, a bit of fog coming over the hills. And that's an area of Europe that I haven't gone to yet. He's from northern
Yeah.
UK, so I haven't
Yeah.
been there yet, but I'd like to go. But let me just say again, thanks for having me in your house.
Sure.
I know we're
No problem.
expecting, it's under renovation right now, so we're expecting maybe some bumps and crashes, but
Yeah, nothing yet, so I think we're okay.
yeah, so sounds good. And yeah, I mean, I have some audience in Canada. I know that, you know, however small it is. So they're probably familiar with, you know, who you are. But for my limited audience in Europe, I don't think that they would know
They won't
Jay
have
Ingram.
a clue who I am.
Well, they might. They might. I mean, you were, you know, anyone growing up in Canada when I grew up, you know, in the 90s, knows Jay Ingram from radio, from TV. You've authored several books. You now do live shows, music. You've done it all, really.
Well,
So
no,
wh-
but
why
you
don't you?
You never feel like that, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, I'm not even on Instagram yet, and I think
You're missing out.
that's a flaw. You know, I think I should be. So I don't know. I'm on the verge, and I also have to think. Do I really need that? Like at some point, you do become old-fashioned, right? And
Yeah.
you want to, like for instance, it's all about how you want to source the information. If I see a news report that is in both video and print form,
Mm-hmm.
I will never watch the video. No, that's backwards, I think, to where younger audiences are today. But I feel I can get through the print version much faster
Oh, definitely.
and pick out what's relevant. And I don't need, I mean, if I'm curious to see what the person looks like, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But if it's a politician I'm already familiar with, just read it.
What's the point? And actually, this came up last year. I was at the Association of British Science Writers, you know, summer journalism school or whatever.
And this topic came up, and I think they had some metrics. I'm not sure where they got it, but they said actually a lot of people are still reading. Most people still consume it in print, and they figure it is because, like you said, you can kind of go at your own speed and pick out the relevant information. If it's a video and you already know the intro, you can't just skip ahead a paragraph and find where you're going.
You're trapped by it.
Exactly. So it was this idea of like time, right? Like time, I think, is still a constraint for people when they're consuming these kind of things. But
You know what I've always sort of wanted is, let's say, an online newspaper, that when you click on it, when you see a headline, there's different ways of viewing it, like the 5-line version of the event, the 25-line, the longer read, and you just click on. I mean, maybe somebody does that, but for each topic you have that, even if it's the originally the long piece that you just edit down. But then I could read exactly how much I want to read for any story.
yeah.
I don't want to, story A, I don't want to read it all. I only want to know, okay, it's that fact.
Yeah.
Another guy got shot,
Yeah.
But others require more.
Yeah. So I was going to say, why don't you give, if you don't mind, give just a little brief of your career, where you started.
Oh, okay.
Just for my friends in Europe that are listening.
Sure. So I was in Toronto, and I started teaching at a school called Ryerson. It's now a university. It was a college. But it had a radio. I started teaching biology and chemistry. But it had a radio station, a professional radio station, not a campus station, but a sort of separate entity that was related. And they did educational radio, so I started doing that. And then I did a biology course on the radio. And then I started freelancing for the CBC. This is all radio.
Yeah.
And then I started hosting the National Science CBC radio program,
Quirks and Quarks. Yeah.
In 1979. Did that through the 1980s, started writing books in the late 80s, and then eventually got to Discovery Channel and hosted the national show Daily Planet there for 16 years. Now it's been canceled.
I saw that. Yeah.
So, nobody, it bothered me because I understand the decision, but the decision is not motivated by what's your best show or what's the most creative way to present science or anything like that. It's motivated by money. If you've got a lot of people working in your office, you're costing a lot of money. If you use resources heavily because you're putting together a show literally day by day, that costs money. You need to fix your bottom line. What's the easiest thing to look? That show's really expensive.
Right.
Let's just axe it,
So,
which is what they did.
So do you think it's, I don't know. I was sad to see it go, obviously. And I remember, it was kind of the first of its kind, right? A daily science news show.
The only of its kind.
The only of its kind.
It was unique when we started it back in 1995. And we knew that nobody else was doing a daily, pretty much prime time, like 7 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah.
Hourly science show, 5 days a week. And, the first ones were, anybody who lived in Canada then might remember the show was called At Discovery Canada, not Daily Planet. Anyway, we did a lot of that it was kind of guesswork a lot of the time, but that's...
Figuring it out.
But so that's how it started. So I've, basically I have written, done radio, done TV. But there are lots of things I haven't done. So
so where do you see, this is like, with Daily Planet leaving, so is it, and you just explained it's sort of a bottom line decision, but I'm curious, as I sort of start a career in this science communication, science broadcast, where do you see it going? Is TV, everyone keeps talking about how TV's dead or print is going to be the next thing that goes out. What are the...
Yeah, I don't see anything going out. Commercial TV is hurting right now because of the shift of ad dollars to the internet.
Yeah.
That fact underlies a lot of programming decisions. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the CBC. You don't get government funding. You live and die by advertising. But I don't think TV will disappear. I mean, what the things on TV that really attract people, like for instance, the NFL has been huge on TV, but their latest numbers in terms of both TV, I think, and attendance are slipping. And this was the NFL is like
The untouchable.
the organization of a sport. Anyway, so I don't know. I mean, you're doing these podcasts and you're writing stuff. So those are that's like radio and
That's
writing. That's
kind of
been
mainstay.
around for a while.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there will be other opportunities. I really do know of people in their early 20s, like 22, 23, who as social media people are better than anybody else.
In terms of science?
Just in terms of, well, not even specifically science, but the example I know is working in a science sort of related field.
Right.
It's just that there's a way of doing social media. There's being punctual, being often, being surprising, being, everything that goes into making that something that will catch your attention. 22 years old and can do it better than most people.
I wonder, this is something that I'm, again, as I enter into this world and you hear all the time, social media, you got to be, that's where you sort of sell your brand anyway. It's a great place to get your stuff out there. And I know that I don't do it well enough. But it seems like a lot of energy, like to always be on, to always be, the next thing or the next. I even, on traveling, I hate bringing a camera. I don't like taking pictures because it ruins the moment for me. So I can't, like, the idea of always having the Instagram or whatever it is ready to be like, hey, check out what we're doing now seems exhausting to me. But I see what you're saying. But
well, you're going to have to. I don't know whether you make these choices implicitly or explicitly. I don't remember ever looking 10 years ahead in my career and thinking this is what I want to be doing. I was just happy doing what I was doing.
Right.
And, it was always nice to have some kind of financial security, but, never had mostly 1-year contracts throughout my career. So I got to live with that. I mean, so I don't know whether you decide what your best way of communicating science is. Obviously that sort of would change with time, but if you're naturally not inclined to bring a camera, I think that says something about you that should be incorporated in how if you're going to plan your career, you should take that into account. I actually don't like doing that stuff.
Yeah.
And there would be people that would, and they'll go in a different direction.
Yeah. It does seem, you get a lot of doom and gloom sentiment when you talk about, young writers, and they're all like, wow, there's all these publications are closing and stuff. But it does seem like there is a lot more latitude for that kind of thing to really make your own thing, whether it's on the internet or podcasts or through your writing. That's or something. Right. There's a lot more space to do that. The other question or the other thought I have that I would like to put to you about science communication, science journalism is, do you think that it is, it's changing, obviously, but is it as important or more important now? You in the current, we'll say, testy climate that we seem to find ourselves in the media, and even in, I never thought I'd say it, but creeping into personal relationships. So I wonder if you think like this, we need, science literacy, science advocacy is sorely lacking, or is it sort of at where it's always been, but these other factors are maybe kind of exacerbating it for people like you, people like me who do science as a career?
I'm not sure that it's going to change significantly because of the current sort of antagonism to fact and evidence. I think it's serious. And I think that science communicators have to think really hard about how best to get those ideas across. So you have to fight back against that antagonism. But how do you do that best?
That's a great...
that is the question. There was just an online publication today, showing once again that, let me back up. Scientific literacy is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's been measured and quantified, and there's a guy in the States that's done a lot of science literacy surveys. And, generally it shows that less than half the population really know anything about science. Now, how little that is sort of up for debate. I've always thought 10 or 15%. Like 10 or the standard thing used to be 10% of the population can understand a science article in the New York Times.
Okay.
So 10% isn't all that great. I mean, the New York Times is good, the writing's good and everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's not low level.
Yeah.
It's high level, but it's high level journalism, and
Yeah.
10% of the public. But that's science's problem, not the New York Times.
Right.
So this idea of literacy, anyway, took hold. If we could only, this was one of the main parts of this, if we could only improve the public's scientific literacy, get them to know more science, one of the main effects will be that political issues that have scientific implications will be decided better because there's going to be an input of science into them.
You can say what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah. There'll be more people will be evidence oriented.
Right.
So that's been proven to be like 100% wrong. It's if there was this classic study done where when the Tea Party was a big thing in the U.S., so
Right.
really right wing
Yeah.
individualists. So they surveyed a group of Tea Party adherents, some of whom were tested and shown to be scientifically illiterate, and some who were literate. I forget what the what the threshold was.
Yeah. Right.
Then they were given, so they were asked opinions on typical things like climate change. Is it human induced? And the answers you get are pretty negative, right? But then they show them some evidence that, as I recall, sort of suggested that climate change was real. And then they came back and I hope I have this right. I do know that when they came back and resurveyed them, the scientifically literate ones were even more opposed to the idea of human-induced climate change.
So they dug into their position.
Because they have some scientific understanding, but they deploy it to back up their argument, which they've already decided,
Right.
on some no evidence or bogus evidence. And there was yet another replication of that today. So the idea that if we make the society scientifically literate, it's sort of going to go science's way is ridiculous.
It doesn't work. And this is we've had this conversation before. And it was shocking to me. And I think when you say that story, those facts that you just laid out to scientists, is even more shocking. It's almost like they can't comprehend that, and I think this is where a lot of the frustration comes with, because it's like, well, if you can't use facts and sort of evidence to make decisions or convince people of something, well, what can you do? Like, what is the thing? And then this brings up the thoughts in my head of just, well, should this be the goal of science media, is just to constantly be fact checking people, debunking things? I feel like it's not working, obviously, and it's becomes antagonistic to the people who you're trying to convince, and this is the hardening of positions, and it just seems like a whole cluster, but I'm not sure. So I don't know if you have any ideas as to what you then do, but
I think that it's probably true that whatever has been tried hasn't really worked. It depends. I don't think the fact that a group of people might be from the beginning opposed to the idea of anthropogenic climate change doesn't mean that they will always have that opinion. What
Right.
it does mean, though, is that it's an opinion not based on the scientific fact. It's almost an attitude. And I should point out that both ends of the political spectrum are subject to that.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
So all of us, really, I mean, unless we're in the middle somewhere,
Yeah.
are really held prisoner by attitudes and positions that don't necessarily correlate with what's known.
Yeah.
Well,
and unless you're really careful about like really putting the effort in to examine your own position, which is very hard to do.
Yeah, I wouldn't depend on people doing that. What I think has to happen, though, is that when scientists want to address a subject with the general public, the first thing they have to think about is, who are they?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who is the audience? Who's going to read this? What do I know about what they know? If I harangue them, are they going to respond? There's a question that isn't asked often enough, right? Because it doesn't work. You have to, somehow a way has to be figured out. Different ways have to be figured out. There are diverse audiences out there. If you're trying to be strategic or about your message, then, there are people that will probably tell you who your ideal audience is. But whether you as a podcaster, I think the creative sort of avenue is the way to go. Not so much thinking about, this is going back to a previous conversation, not so much thinking about where the opportunities are exactly, although you do have to be aware of that. But starting from the question, what do I really want to do? Instead of, where can I get a job?
Right.
And somewhere in between that is everybody has a different comfort zone.
Right.
But anyway, getting back to this idea, how do you persuade an audience?
Well, and even if that should be the goal.
Well, even if it isn't, maybe things would go a lot better.
Yeah.
I mean, if you obviously right there, if you're somehow typecast as a climate scientist, going into some Republican state, rural, I think the first thing you should be thinking about is how you're going to approach this.
Yeah. Well, and should I even be here?
Well, that's another question, right?
I guess, and that one speaks
Should
more
I-
to like what your motivation is, how passionate you are about the issue and things like that. But
Yeah, and I mean, it's as science writing and broadcasting is as varied as nonfiction of any kind or fiction. There's many, many different approaches, lots of great writers and TV people and so on. But, these issues like, the anti-vaccine movement, how best, how do you address, where do those concerns come from? That's really the question. Where did they come from? They surely can't all have come from Wakefield's stuff in the Lancet.
Just the concerns of the anti-vaxxers. What's their motivation behind?
Yeah, and and then it's hard to remind oneself that whatever applies to one end of the political spectrum applies to the other as well, pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah.
So people who would see themselves to the left of center might want to re-examine why they hold certain beliefs. And there are really interesting issues around this. GMOs. As far as I know, all the evidence is that GMOs have no effect on human health.
That's from what I can tell too.
Yeah, and I mean, we're consuming them all the time, and yet at the same time, there's big opposition in Europe and
Huge. Yeah.
And in North America, there's opposition, but there's also a marketing opportunity. If you label your cereal GMO free.
Yeah. Natural, organic, pick a word.
Knowing what I know about its impact on human health, I'm reluctant to buy such a product. But it's hard to know, because there is another aspect to it, which is, the overplanting of areas with GMO, whatever it is, and crowding out milkweed and reducing the available crop from monarch butterflies migrating.
Yeah, exactly. Monocultures.
So,
and
but
things
to be
like
honest, have I caught up with that? No.
Yeah.
So what I just said to you is based on like 4 years ago or something, which
Yeah.
is not very responsible on my part.
I like this thought though of like understanding what the people's motivation is, because I mean I've been like I said, it seems even in personal relationships, a lot of these conversations are coming up and getting contentious. And I've been speaking with friends about how to have conversations without them ending in shouting matches and stuff. And, this is like a no-brainer sort of statement. I'm not claiming to be profound or anything, but there usually is more common ground between people, I feel, than there is not. And so understanding the other side's motivation for an issue, I think is a good way to have the conversation, rather than trying to do this, well, I'm going to prove you wrong with this, and I'm going to prove you wrong with this. For climate change, for example, I feel like people that I've spoken to that are staunchly opposed to it, when it comes down to it, they're worried about jobs, especially here in Alberta, like where oil sands are huge. They're worried about jobs. They're worried about, getting this pipeline or whatever it is built so that we can have jobs for the future. And so if you shift the conversation to, okay, well, now we have a common thing, because I'm worried about jobs too. I don't want to see anyone go homeless. I don't want to see, a recession or whatever it may be. But now we can have a productive conversation on what the best way to plan the economy of our little area is, rather than, is this real? Is it not real? And in doing so, hopefully you can, come to a point that, it doesn't matter if your job is in oil or renewable energy. If you have a job, you'll be happy, you'll be fine. There's obviously still going to be issues, changing people over and stuff, but finding that common ground, I think, is really important. And I haven't thought about it in terms of anti-vaxxers, because I don't, they obviously, their common ground would be, you want your children to be safe. Just turns out that what they're doing is doing the exact opposite for their children and other people's children. But so I wonder if but then how do you go, in a mass media sort of sense, have a discussion, a nuanced discussion like that? You almost have to go to every single person and have like a one-on-one and try and calmly find this ground,
No, it's a good question, because let's say you did want to address that subject. Right now, it strikes me that medical writers, and whether they're actual doctors or medical writers, are emphasizing the downside, the hazards that are happening, measles outbreaks and whooping cough. Mm-hmm. It's absurd, really.
Yeah.
And, but instead of railing against that, acknowledge that, yes, I think that view is absurd and dangerous to others. How do I deal with this? Rather than kind of leaping ahead and deciding, oh, we're going to do a TV ad. Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm saying most good companies would do this anyway. The first thing you do is figure out, who would that reach?
Right.
So if people are interested in, there's a woman named Catherine Hayhoe who's achieved some fame a few years ago, I think, because she wrote a book about how to talk to fundamentalist religious people about climate change. But I heard her speak at TELUS Spark here in Calgary, and she recounted this story where she went and met with officials in Chicago. This is all about climate change, right? But how do you approach the head of the fire department, the police chief, the roads guy, et cetera, et cetera? How do you communicate the idea of climate change to them? So she just asks them, what have you seen in the last few years in your job? Well, the road guy says a lot more potholes.
Yeah.
The guys that lay pipes say the ground is softer. They can start earlier in the year. And through doing this, she makes them aware. Then she I wasn't there, but as she told it, then she kind of shows them how these things are consistent with climate change. But she doesn't hit them over the head right off the top with climate change.
Right.
She asks them to talk about their situation.
Yeah.
See, that's really, really smart.
I think it's something that I hit on with a colleague in Germany, Toby, if you happen to listen to this, but he's a therapist, training to be a therapist. And he was describing to me, I was just asking him because I was interested in how that all works. And he was saying, well, we do what we call the Columbo method, which is from the old TV show Columbo, but it's just asking questions. It's exactly what you were just describing. He used an example of someone who, say, convinced that the FBI is following him and this guy is standing outside of his house watching him all the time. And, and you just start with questions. Well, why might the FBI be following you? Like, what do you think you did? Why do you think they're doing this? And then they have to sort of think about it and give a reason. Well, what do you think? Could you come up with maybe another reason why a guy might be standing outside your house? Oh, yeah, well, maybe he's waiting for a friend, or maybe his car broke down or something. And in doing this, you guide them to the realization that, hey, maybe it's not what I've built in my head. And it's the same kind of idea of, and I kind of crudely put it as like, if you give people enough rope, they'll hang themselves with it, But it's, if you ask the question and question the motivation, why do you think that? Like, what makes you think that? Or what, might there be an alternative? And again, it's like, how do you then, you can't have this conversation with every single person. And the method that she was just talking to, like, that would be exhausting to go to every single person and be like, what have you seen?
So one thing, let's say that on a spectrum of belief and disbelief in climate change, 10% are implacably opposed to the idea, 10% are rabidly in favor at opposite ends. So, but there's still 80% in the middle.
Right.
And those are people who are more likely to have their mind be open-minded, put it that way, be open to change
Right.
if change is necessary.
Yeah. And
So
change
maybe the strategy is not to worry too much about the skeptic, call them skeptics.
Yeah. Or the fringes, right? I mean, like,
Yeah, but the fringe gets defined by whomever wants to call
It's
so
true.
I'd be a little bit careful about that. I mean, I don't know where the fringe regarding naturopaths would stand, but I think some are probably legit. I don't know the field that well. And I think some maybe overdo it.
yeah.
But MDs, I don't know how many MDs would call naturopaths the fringe.
Yeah. Or quacks or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
And I mean, they can be equally as hardened into their positions as well. Of any naturopath is bogus. It's all whatever. But even though I mean and I don't know the field that well either, but I would be willing to bet that some of the herbal methods that a naturopath might prescribe would have some basis in the fact that people have used them for a long time and they probably do something. Maybe it's not the most efficient way to treat something, but I don't know. I don't think it's all quackery, but I don't know. And yeah, what's the point in I don't know.
We could talk about homeopathy too.
Well, I think that one's been proven to be quite. I guess the train of thought that I'm thinking is that people that would, let's say we're talking about the motivations for people believing in a certain thing. So for naturopaths, why would someone go to a naturopath? A lot of the stuff that I hear is because, well, big pharma this, over medication, they're just jamming pills down their throat, which is probably
actually is true.
Yeah, exactly. But does that mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater and get rid of the whole, medicine, scientifically proven medicine thing and jump all the way to this other thing? Obviously, it's somewhere in the middle. But again, how do you have that nuanced conversation?
Well, in the end, it may be all political and not scientific. I mean, the fact that you can show that whether people accept an idea or not is governed largely by attitudes that they already have, which are pretty unlikely to be swayed by new evidence. They hold on to them pretty well. I think understanding that is really taking that to heart, I think is critical. But I also think that other issues will arise. And I think we've seen from that fact that you can have this kind of attitudinal approach to science. We already see how it's being exploited in the U.S. And how scientists in this country were muzzled by a previous government. So, we're at an important point, I think, where we have to look for opportunities to communicate science.
Yeah. Well, and another discussion that has come up in some of the meetings that I've attended, the British Science Writers Association, is science journalism too easy on science? Has it become just a cheerleader for science. And again, I could see how in the face of antagonism towards science, you want to be like, no, look at this. It's good. It's great. But there's not a lot of critical pieces of the science
Yeah, but
world.
this has been an issue for a long time. So I can remember in the 1980s when I was at Quirks and Quarks that that was something we had to think about. You know, were we being unnecessarily approving of stuff that went on in science? And I don't think we were, actually. I think when we decided to take a topic on seriously, it could go in either direction.
Yeah.
And you know, on the other hand, I think we had an attitude like everybody does. But anyway, this idea that you know, that we have to worry about that. I think it's always been that way.
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious that some magazines will tilt more toward being cheerleaders than others.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to choose your magazine. You know, there's no point. Being resentful that magazine A is being published because you hate it.
Yeah.
Just ignore it.
Yeah.
That's the best thing. So if it's full of mystical medical advice, only if somebody like Dr. Oz starts to get involved, then should you get heated.
Yeah.
Because he's an actual doctor
Yeah.
purveying junk on TV.
Yeah.
So I think that's worth protesting.
Yeah. And especially people with such a large platform. And with the health stuff, I mean, I guess with all of these issues, climate change too, it's something that affects everybody, whether you see that or not, you know, the vaccine thing, whatever. So I understand people, you know, getting uppity, but yeah.
We did a story on Daily Planet with Dr. Oz back before he was famous. He was sort of locally famous somewhere. And he agreed. We did a series on sort of psychic things, and one of which, I think we did an ESP one, but one of which was therapeutic touch.
Mm-hmm.
And so he supervised an experiment where there was a surgical patient, and you know how the blood gets circulated, and there's a kind of a bag where the blood level stays the same, and it's constantly being fed to the patient. So they had a nurse so imagine a sort of flat bag full of blood.
Yeah.
And a nurse put her hands close to, but not touching it.
Right.
And I think thought good thoughts or something.
Well, yeah. Putting the energy into the blood.
Yeah, putting the energy into the blood. And Dr. Oz supervised that. We did it as a serious thing. Didn't seem to have much effect, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know. These are all topics that seem like I don't know if it's like some of them have been bandied about forever, but others not so much. But one thing that I'd like to touch on, because if we're thinking about new ways of doing science communication, is the Beakerhead Festival, which you are a part of. I'm not sure co-founder or
technically,
but you're involved with it.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I'll let you explain what it is, because honestly, I have not seen anything else like it, and I've mentioned it to science communication colleagues in Europe as an example of something that's different, something that's new. So I'll let you explain it, and then we can talk about the experiences and what you think the engagement level is and how it's going. And
well, without knowing exactly what people have already experienced in terms of science centers or science fairs, Beakerhead actually is a year-round organization involved in schools and other things. But the primary piece is a 5-day extravaganza in September, which is we like to call it a mashup of art, science, and engineering. There's a lot of engineers here in the city of Calgary. There are a lot of artists. And from the beginning, we thought bringing those two unlike sorts of people together might help create interesting installations or sculptures or exercise or workshops or demos that you might not otherwise see. And just as a result of that, be a good piece of science communication. Give people a sense in a highly interactive way of what science is all about. But the goal is not to teach people science. Mm-hmm. The goal is to delight people.
Right. Entertain.
And then if people are delighted, they'll stick around, they'll tell others, they'll come back. And it's a much less directed version of science communication. But I think our numbers, we've only been around for 5 years. I think our numbers show that we're doing something right. I mean, last year we had, pushing 150,000 people over 5 days. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
And, it's a curious mix of art and science. That's all I can say. So hardcore people might look at it and say, well, what are you actually learning there?
Mm-hmm.
And we would say, maybe they're not learning anything you think they should learn.
Yeah. Who
but
cares?
They're learning something.
Yeah.
And getting a feel for the fact that science and technology has an entertainment component and really can be fabulous.
Yeah.
And what you're really doing is bringing together thousands of people with whose minds you share a little piece of, I love science as entertainment.
Yeah.
And we just think that's the right way to go.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. I like this idea of, not explicitly being out to teach, or that a science communication thing doesn't have to explicitly be about you're walking away with this knowledge.
No, but I think a good portion of it should be. I'm not saying that everything should be Beakerhead. I'm just saying that we feel this is a bit of a space that very few people operated in, even science centers. I think you could easily see them as places where you go to learn science.
Definitely.
Now, they take great pains to be interactive and for kids to have fun. And often that works. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in the most surprising ways. Sometimes the simplest things are the best. But you're still trying to get a point across. We're not really trying to get a point across with Beakerhead. We're just trying to create a positive atmosphere.
And I mean, I attended 1 year before I moved to Germany, and it was great. And every time I come, I tend to come home for my yearly visits around this time. It is September now. And there's excitement about it. I mean, amongst people that I know, people talk about it. It seems to get bigger every time, and it is a spectacle. You see some pretty crazy things going on.
Well, if you'd asked us 5 years ago, Mary Ann Moser and me asked us 5 years ago what we would see Beakerhead in September 2018 to be like, we'd wave our arms and have some vague statements, but I don't think we had any idea. And I'm not saying that it has grown uncontrollably and we just couldn't imagine it. We thought we had a good idea. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean, there are a lot of good ideas out there that never become anything more than a good idea. But we consulted a lot, actually, and we worked a lot, and we got to know a lot of people before we ever thought of actually launching it. And so we had a pretty good idea that if you could do this, this, and this, if you could offer people, or you give people an opportunity to have lunch in a completely dark room where you literally can't see anything, and there's a neuroscientist there explaining how you're feeling, that kind of opportunity doesn't come up very much, and that's what Beakerhead's all about.
Yeah, it is a totally unique set of installations and stuff that I think you'll see. Do you think it's something that, what is it something unique to Calgary that makes it work, or could you imagine it in other places? Is it just take the right individuals?
I think there are probably medium-sized cities. In a city like Toronto or Vancouver, I suspect the heavy lifting that you'd have to do even to bring something like that to life might be quite a bit more daunting than it was here. Mm-hmm. It was pretty hard here too. Yeah. And it's not easy to keep it rolling once you get it rolling either. Your work is never done, basically.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, we think we're on the right track. One of the really important things about Beakerhead is that we are involving the artistic community more and more each year. And we have projects where an architect, an engineer, and an artist will collaborate. Mm-hmm. We love that. We have opportunities for people to be at the Banff Center. So it's not just tacking a little bit of art onto the end of a piece of science and calling that a collaboration.
Yeah.
That's not a collaboration.
Yeah.
And you're not really going to achieve much if people are just thinking, well, we've got to have some art in this, so let's sing it instead of say it. Well,
Right. The
that
sort
may
of
or may not work.
bare bones. How do we? Yeah. No, for sure.
So we're trying to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I know it's one of those things, again, that maybe even the science community forgets how much creativity is involved in science, and how those two, it seems like a nice mix that you don't think of at the you wouldn't naturally jump to, but creativity, artistic, talent with scientific themes or topics it's
And
a big
always,
space.
Doesn't always work.
Sure.
But sometimes it works really, really well.
Yeah.
So it's a kick to see that kind of stuff come to life.
So do you find, I mean, this is just my own personal, I come from a biology background. Right. So science communication, it seems to me, tends to really go physics, space heavy, engineering and stuff. So do you find like certain topics obviously lend themselves better to this kind of thing? Biology being one that doesn't?
To Beakerhead?
Yeah, or to these sorts of, maybe creative expressions of science, or science communication in general, or even the public interest.
I don't think it's, if you're asking me if I think it's hard to bring, say, biology into this, no, it isn't. And the thing you can do on top of bringing biology in it is to bring some psychology in it as well.
Right.
And so the event I just mentioned, the lunch without light in a totally dark room, the experimental animals, if you will, are the people, and they're experiencing this cool brain stuff going on. So that's a good example where it's not chemistry, physics, and it's not just science either. It's personal.
It's emotional experience. Yeah.
And that really adds a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I just think you see so much science outreach stuff is just, it's space, it's technology, and I guess people think that that's what the public wants to consume, but...
Yeah, but it really is different audiences. I mean, there are some polymaths who will read every physics article, every chemistry article, every whatever.
Yeah.
But most people will target some area, and indeed there are writers to supply that area, like what you're doing. So that works. It's just important to remember there are many such audiences. Scientific American, I guess it's only online now. Anyway,
the print version,
the version that I'm familiar with had a diversity of articles.
Yeah.
And there would usually be some anthropology, some cosmology or space subject, some sort of animal behavior, a chemistry one, and a really good mix. And I'm sure that it would be true that people would read 3 out of 7 or something, and they would end up over time being pretty predictable. This person does not read the space stuff, but still there was enough of general interest that it did well. But I think the audience is a bit more fragmented now.
Yeah. So what are you consuming in science topics these days? Do you what's got you going? What are you reading?
I'm interested in Alzheimer's disease, and more broadly than that, the biology of aging, and more narrow than that, do we actually know what the lifespan of a human is? Because there's some ambiguity about that. So biology of aging generally. So the oldest person ever was a French woman, Marie Calmont, and she was 122 plus when she died. That was in 1997, and nobody's done better than that.
122. Okay.
Yeah, and a couple of people just this past year have died at 117. So one of the questions is, what does Marie Calmont represent at 122? Is that such an outlier that will rarely, one day we might see another one, but, unpredictably?
Right.
Or is she just the leading edge? And as more and more people become 100-year-old, there'll be more slop, statistical slop into the teens, and then, eventually reach that. Well,
Yeah.
nobody really knows the answer. It's contentious because the problem is Calmont is really one data point apart from a pretty dense cluster at 117 and less, which is amazing in itself, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That there could be a lot of people who are 114 years old.
Yeah. But so what it would, I mean, I think my first reaction to people living that long is that they must have received a lot of medical intervention to keep them alive.
Yeah,
And
not
it's-
all of them do, though. That's
not all
just
of them
it.
do. Yeah, I'm sure. And so then I guess when you mentioned, like what is the natural lifespan of a human, my again gut reaction is like, oh well, we're surpassing what our bodies were evolved to do.
Well, that's true in a sense. The mismatch between what and how much we eat and how much we exercise. And if you go back a couple of million years or even 150,000 years, people were on the move a lot. They weren't gorging themselves on sugar-rich food, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I'm not sure how different.
But isn't there also the thought that, or the fact, I don't know if it's a fact, that it's possible that because of the way, 150,000 years ago, the lifestyle that you were doing was a lot more dangerous. So maybe they never even saw the full
That's right.
lifespan of a human.
That's right.
Because they died before they could even get
And
that
so
chance.
that effect has lasted until quite recently. Yes, so-called Stone Age people would succumb to injury and infection in a way that we wouldn't. But people died of infections in 1920 too. 20 also.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't until the 40s with the discovery of penicillin earlier that things started to happen. And childhood or maternal mortality at birth used to be really high. Now it's treated effectively. And so lots of things, there has been better intervention to lower blood pressure and prevent heart attack. So what happens if you eliminate heart attacks? Does everyone get Alzheimer's?
Yeah.
I mean, these 114-year-olds don't have it.
Right.
Because
they wouldn't have made it that far.
They wouldn't have gone that far. So it's an interesting issue. And then there are people who believe, from the chemistry point of view, that there are maybe a few systems in the body that need to be interfered with in some way, so as not to not to be as prominent an actor in the whole aging process. There's a guy who says there's 7 pathways, and if you could interrupt them all, you wouldn't age.
At all.
At all. And there's another, there are 2 people in Silicon Valley that are leading a big charge to live forever. It's fascinating, actually.
But it just seems so counterintuitive, and maybe it's just because it's just the way that it's always been. But with the passage of time, you accumulate wear and tear.
Oh yes, but the idea would be to intervene before you really start to feel that.
But is this
so? Ray Kurzweil sees a time in the future where there'll be little nanobots flowing through your body, correcting stuff as you go, en route, so to speak, and just be so efficient that, in fact, you might age, but it might take hundreds of years, not just 100.
But so then it's like without that intervention, though, there is a limit to what a human body can. Because you said these 7 systems.
Still, nobody really knows what that. I mean, we're intervening already.
Right.
So, what do you call the natural lifespan? If nobody else lives to 122, then the idea that it's probably centered around 118 or thereabouts. 115 has been suggested. Not enough data yet, though.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and then it like you alluded to a little bit leads to the Alzheimer's. Is if you keep the body, the blood, the heart, everything, the muscles sort of going. What of the brain? How does the brain age? And I don't know a lot about brain science, but I imagine that it doesn't age in the same way that muscles and other tissue do.
If you're one of these optimists, you could argue that, of course, we would never advocate a longer lifespan if the risk of Alzheimer's were the same as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, if you sort of do an artificial kind of extrapolation of if people, some people get Alzheimer's in their 80s, some never get it in their entire life. But the longer you live, the more likely it is that you have it.
Yeah.
So if humans in the current situation, if humans live to 140, every single one would have Alzheimer's.
Yeah. If you wait long enough, you'll get it, basically.
So obviously the proponents would just say, well, not only would we never risk that, but the root of Alzheimer's, there are chemical processes. And indeed, some of the anti-Alzheimer's drugs that haven't yet proven to be very effective are based on interrupting chemical pathways, preventing enzymic cleavage of a particular site, that kind of stuff. It hasn't been shown to be super effective yet, but you could easily see in 20 years there would be a way. So people's brains would stay, 35, 40-ish. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, some people might want to stay 22. I don't know.
Well, man.
Brain's fast then.
Yeah. It's perpetually 22. I feel like how much looking back at that age and seeing how much I didn't know, I don't know if I could stay that age forever. But is the leading sort of thought about Alzheimer's, it's protein buildup. It's like...
Yeah, amyloid.
Amyloid, yeah.
A beta. And A beta comes from an incorrect enzymic cleavage in, I think, 2 or 3 places of amyloid precursor protein.
Right.
And I think it's actually in the cell membrane when it's cleaved. Anyway, if it's done incorrectly, a small piece results. That small piece, A beta, sort of clamp to other pieces of A beta, and they form fibrils quite easily.
Clumps of this.
And then fibrils clump together to form plaques. And plaques start to build up midlife in many people. But it's only when they reach a certain level that apparently another runaway molecule called tau starts to accumulate. The exact relationship between the two isn't known. When tau starts to rise, memory loss starts to increase. And yeah, so the amyloid looks like it kicks the whole thing off.
Right.
So most drugs that have been tried so far have attempted to prevent this inaccurate cleavage, or if a plaque is already formed, destroy it.
Right.
There are some people who argue that that's actually a bad idea because the plaques are simply a kind of trap for amyloid beta molecules, and as long as they're in the plaque, they're not free to go to the synapse and do something there. But nobody really knows.
Yeah.
Most people think plaque sort of correlates with the eventual degree of damage.
So the idea being like there might be an actual use for this plaque. The body.
Yeah. It might be doing the cell some good rather than some ill.
And then it's just then this sort of, if it reaches a threshold or it's a runaway thing. So interesting.
But so some of the drugs that have been tried have succeeded in reducing plaque and A beta levels, but have not succeeded, except with very faint hints, in preventing dementia. So the goal, it's kind of ironic, the goal was reduce plaque.
Yeah.
The result? Satisfied. Reduced plaque. Oh, unfortunately, everybody still has Alzheimer's.
Huh.
That's really what it was.
So it didn't. Yeah.
So now the general feeling is got to start earlier. Plaque starts to build up earlier. Got to hit these things before they become plaque.
Right.
That's when they're still active. Hit them before they're active.
This might be, I don't know if it might be stretch your knowledge on it, but Alzheimer's always makes me think of prion disease. And in prion disease, it's a similar thing where you're building up protein in the brain. But does Alzheimer's, when these plaques start forming, do they know if it induces more? Because like a prion is a misfolding, and so once one does, it seems to set off a domino effect where they all start misforming and creating this plaque. Is it similar in Alzheimer's, where you see like an increase in progression?
The plaque, in the number of plaques and the areas in which they are increase, but it's not quite sort of self-triggering like prions. I don't actually know exactly how much A beta you have to have in a cell before you see visible plaques. How many plaques does a cell? The plaques actually, though, are outside the cell. So that's a bit misleading what I just said. But how those plaques aggregate from the A beta in the cytoplasm, and how early you have to do something to stop that to actually have an effect on the ultimate risk of dementia. And maybe it's not the plaque, maybe it's the secondary one, the tau. Maybe in the end, because I will say there is one critical piece of evidence that if you track how loss, sort of incapacity of the brain spreads in Alzheimer's, starts in the hippocampus, the temporal lobe, and then spreads to the frontal lobe, and you get different behaviors affected, memory first, planning and so on second, and so on. It's the spread of tau that reflects that exactly. So you got memory loss, you look in the hippocampus, you find lots of tau. If you go a bit earlier, you don't see any memory loss. You might see a few plaques, but you see all kinds of plaques up here, but they're not causing any apparent symptom at that point. So maybe it's tau so there are now some anti-tau drugs in early clinical trial, I think.
And do you know what the research on sleep and Alzheimer's is? Because I've read just very few pieces where, one of the functions of sleep is to help clean out cellular waste and things like this in the brain, and that sleep, I think it was the thing I read, and I out on a limb here, so I could be totally wrong, but there was a predictive element to how much sleep you get and risk of Alzheimer's.
There are at least animal experiments that show that A beta, or that kind of plaque and fibril material, is reduced in the cell if you do that. If sleep is normal, so it's during, I think, even certain phases of sleep where you get this material expelled. I'm not sure what the human evidence is, other than maybe people reporting sleep difficulties associated with this eventual development of Alzheimer's. I don't know that literature, but in animals there does seem to be a correlation. If you have mice that are engineered to develop plaques, you deprive them of sleep. They show the signs, the buildup of amyloid and behavioral signs before other mice who had normal sleep.
Okay, so there might be, but we don't know yet in humans.
It's always good to get enough sleep, though, probably.
Yeah, I mean, that's another, like, a hot topic inside of science stuff that I feel like is happening a lot now is the sleep research. But well, we've been going for just about an hour, but I have to touch on one thing before we kind of wrap it up, and it's right here. I'm looking at a painting of our good friend the Sasquatch, the Bigfoot, and we've had conversations in the past about Bigfoot, and I don't think either of us are going to sit here. We're not going to have the conversation of whether it's real or not, but you've seemed to have a lot of knowledge about what people who believe in Bigfoot, what their evidence is, and
I've read a lot of that stuff.
What was your interest in it? Like, what brought you?
I don't know. I'm ever since I was really starting to be a science person, I was also interested in lots of claims being made on the fringe for the existence of things like psychic powers.
Right.
Crop circles in England, those would mysteriously appear, and they had to be aliens. UFOs, of course.
Right.
Bigfoot is one of the Loch Ness Monster, not nearly as interesting, I don't think.
Because Bigfoot, it's not as plausible?
yeah. Bigfoot's interesting because there are so many people that take it so seriously.
Right.
And I went to a meeting once at UBC, a 2-day meeting where people went over and over the famous 1967 film and
the Patterson
produced
footage?
their own. Pardon?
The Patterson footage?
Yeah. The famous Patterson film. And then people had slideshows showing evidence that they'd found. There was a guy talking about Bigfoot vocalizations. I used to have them on tape.
Nice.
But I don't have them anymore, sadly. Anyway, the people were so serious that, and some of them are very good storytellers.
Oh, yeah.
So they could intrigue you with their take on the evidence. The evidence, of course, is weak at best.
At best.
Yeah, but it has, as probably every faked evidence has, it has some commonalities that tend to give it this sheen of reality. You know, you find footprints in Northern California, you find footprints in BC. Anatomically, they're very similar in ways that are different from human feet.
Yeah.
Has one guy told every other guy?
That's what I wonder.
It'd be easy today, but don't forget this was happening in the 60s.
Yeah. So is there, in your, sort of looking into the field, is there any piece that makes you even pause for a second and say, well, that's kind of interesting, or that's, because I think with a lot of these things, UFOs, telekinesis, Bigfoot, what I think gets people into it is that you can't totally disprove it. You can't say, well, you don't know for certain, right? Like, and I mean, I don't know for certain. I'll be willing to admit that, especially with UFOs, like the idea of life outside it seems plausible, but there's no good evidence that it is. So you have to kind of run with the assumption that until I see really good evidence. But I think that's what really draws people in. So what do you think have you seen anything that makes you even pause for a second?
With Bigfoot?
Bigfoot or UFOs, or I don't know how much you've gone into any of these.
There's nothing that persuades me these things actually exist.
Yeah.
There's a good example, though, in the Bigfoot story where there is a question, and the question is, who would do this? And
who would make up Bigfoot?
It was a set of prints found near Bossburg, Washington, in 1969. Quite a long, it might have even been 1,000 footprints through the woods.
Yeah.
One of the feet was a normal Bigfoot foot, so it has features unique to it. The other one was the same thing, only a club foot. It was twisted and dug into the soil in a different way. So that's my question. Okay, it's fake. Let's say it's fake, because they're all fake, right?
Yeah.
Some guy, I presume it's a guy, it might not be.
It's
Some
usually
guy
a guy.
says, you know what, I'm gonna lay down 1,031 Bigfoot prints, but I'm gonna make one a Bigfoot clubfoot.
Yeah.
I think that would be really cool.
Yeah. It might lend some credence to
here's the thing. So if somebody did that, the argument for its for the idea that it might be a real footprint also centers around this mysterious guy.
Yeah.
Because it says, who would have the knowledge, the anatomical knowledge, to create an anatomically correct Bigfoot clubfoot? That's not easy. Point taken. It's not easy, right?
Yeah.
Either that narrows down the search for the guy quite dramatically, or it says something like the guy, whoever did it, could have driven 3 hours to the University of Washington, Seattle campus, gotten be a semi-smart guy, anatomy book, make some drawings, do it.
Yeah.
One of the two is true.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's a third, I don't know. But so there are always stories that are intriguing, but they're always, like most stories of any kind, it's all about the people. It's not about the evidence or the thing being discussed.
It's the storyteller.
Who's arguing that?
Yeah.
What's at stake for them?
I'm always interested in, whether these people, some of them I'm sure are in it to fool people and make a buck doing it.
Yeah.
But some seem to genuinely believe it to the point that they will put their evidence under scrutiny, with the chance of being wrong. Like I've seen, several TV shows where we're going to do, genetic analysis on your hair sample that you found.
Yeah.
It's always a bear. It's always a raccoon. It's always something, right? But these people will spin a yarn of, I saw the thing and it was here and it ran away and it looked at me straight in the eyes and it made the noise and I grabbed the hair right from this thing. So it has to be it. It's like, you must know that when they test it, it's not gonna be that, and that you're gonna be exposed as.
No, that person wouldn't know that though. It's the same thing we were talking about earlier. People have points of view that don't depend on the evidence. So her point of view is, yes, Bigfoot lives.
Yeah.
Yes, I encountered one. I'm absolutely sure this hair came from. I mean, they're a little bit delusional. So I don't doubt that he or she believed it.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
That's the way it is.
I just can't imagine going on TV and facing that. I don't know if I've ever been so certain in anything that I would be,
Well, wait till you're delusional and it'll happen.
Wait till the Alzheimer's starts to set in. Well, Jay, thanks a lot for sitting down, taking the time amidst your house repairs and everything else that you got on the go. What do you have on the go? I know you've published recently a book in the last year or so, The Science of Y Squared.
Yeah. So now The Science of Y 3 or Cubed is coming out in November. These are like question and answer books. Some commonly asked questions, science questions, some maybe never before asked in quite that way. So I've been lucky to have 3 of those in a row. I don't know if that will continue. I'm giving some talks. I'm working for Beakerhead, doing a little bit of writing. That's all.
Okay, so I don't know if there's anything else. You playing music still? I see there's a guitar over there.
I'm in a band that does science presentations. But that would be a whole other subject. So let's save that for next time.
All right, we'll save it for next time. Is there anything that you want to direct people to Beakerhead website or anything? I don't know.
Sure, www.beakerhead.com. That's about it, actually. That would be a good place to start. And after September 23rd, I don't know when this is airing.
Probably after Beakerhead.
So Beakerhead's already happened, but there's a fantastic photo and video gallery up there to take a look at.
Well, I would say it's just an interesting thing to look at, especially if you're inclined to think about science communication projects or things that you could do, for next year or whenever it is. If you're in the Calgary area, it's a really great festival. Again, Jay, thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
You're welcome. Thanks.
All right.
Once again, I want to give my utmost thanks to Jay Ingram for being here on this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back with more of these long-form type episodes, Too Grad for You in Conversation. We'll also be back with our regular type episode. Thank you again to the Freak Motif. You've been hearing The Swamp off of their new release, Hot Plate. So go and check that out, frkmtf.com. Big thanks always to Sebastian Aboud for the logo. Any artwork you see on this is his handiwork. And you can check out his stuff at sebastianaboud.com. That's ABBOUD. All right, people. We'll see you next time. Take care.